essentially, Liet-Kynes is a minor character, and I know that Kynes has many fans, but frankly, it is a minor character. And the minor character has been altered from the Dune novel. Now, I'm going to go very carefully through this, not objectively. I don't think objectivity is possible in these affairs, but as impartially as possible. It's mostly going to be a documentary kind of video essay, though I will have my partisan take at the very end. Kynes is a minor character, and in the Dune novel is clearly described as a male, but in the Denis Villeneuve adaptation, he will be a she and is now definitely a female. And the question is, does this radically affect or not affect the story at all, or how people will interpret Dune? There is the added factor of race, but as we'll see, that is not much of a factor. And we'll treat that issue first and then get into gender. Now, it might seem obvious that the racial issue is much more prominent because, of course, Sharon looks very, very different from Max von Sydow. And it may stun people, and I know people might think I'm being partisan or I have an agenda, but if you go through the book carefully, and if you know the lore carefully, we don't really have a race for Kynes. Now, Kynes has traditionally been played by white males, but if we actually look at the description carefully, we don't really have a description of his race. Now, we have some clues what the race might be or could be, but then if we go with those clues, it's probably not a white male. Now, I'm saying this as somebody who really likes the Dune version by David Lynch, and I respect what he was up to, but that form of Kynes we get with Max von Sydow is radically unlike the book on many levels, including age, because Kynes, as far as I understand it, is middle-aged. Max von Sydow is a little bit older than he should be. He also doesn't match in terms of the beard or the hair color or other traits. I have not seen the sci-fi miniseries. I'm aware of it, right? I know I've seen images, and of course I've done research on it, but I have not sat through the whole thing. That you can say is a little bit more accurate, but it is a misnomer to say that Kynes must be or has been a white male. We just don't have any real information on this. Looking at the lore a little bit more carefully, we know that the Fremen are descended from the Zen Sunni. I'm going to acknowledge Quinn, who does a very good sci-fi YouTube channel and knows the Dune lore very thoroughly. And he notes that they're a bunch of nomads and they've been persecuted, right? They've interbreeded with various other groups. So it stands to reason that probably the Fremen are non-white. Kynes is part of the Fremen, so we add it together. It's fairly accurate that the Fremen should be dark-skinned and not light-skinned. Now, I mostly endorse this, but we have to be very, very careful because he makes a lot of critical mistakes. It is true that Sunni is a Muslim religion, but he's conflating two different aspects, namely that Muslim religions tend to be practiced, right, by Arabs and people in the Middle East, and people in the Middle East are much darker skinned than white Europeans. That may be true, but they don't necessarily look African or dark skinned or even that much darker than Europeans. I'm not going to go through the whole lessons of the Middle East or my expertise, but you'll find it's a very wide range of colors. You have Israelis who are very dark-skinned, right? They're African immigrants, and then you have them who are very light-skinned, like Gal Gadot. You have Palestinians who are dark-skinned, but then you have others who are very light-skinned. And then you have these very interesting exceptions like the Kurds who are Aryans. So they're more European than Europeans, and they're very light-skinned, but they're not white, and they're not European. So we really can't conflate Muslim with dark skin. So while it may be possible that Kynes looks like Sharon Brewster, it's highly unlikely. And added to this, we know that Duke Leto is also not white. He's described as olive. So he also does not fit the description of, quote, a white male European, even though he's usually played by white male Europeans. So if we look at the text carefully and the larger lore, we don't really have an answer with Kynes. We just don't have a racial identity. So nothing is going on there. But now let's get to the issue of gender. So while it may be possible or even likely that Kynes is at least not light-skinned, but darker-skinned, he definitely is a male. And he's shown to be a heterosexual male, right? He's a father, he's a man, he's masculine. And that is what fits his description in the novel. And that at least has been consistent until now. And the question now turns to, does this really affect the story? Well, no, because Kynes is a minor character, so it doesn't really affect much of the story. But I don't agree with Quinn or others, or even Denis Villeneuve, who says, well, nothing really essential has changed. Because the reasoning behind changing Kynes into a woman to Denis twofold. One is gender parity. He felt there weren't enough women in the cast. So even though there are a lot of powerful women who were going to be characters in the film, he still felt an imbalance, right, towards men, and he wanted to correct that. I think that's fine, that's his prerogative, but he could have done this by just creating a whole new female character, give her a lot of agency, give her a lot of power and responsibility and all that, but he didn't do that. He just took a pre-existing male character, one who is unambiguously male. This is not like race. Race is extremely ambiguous in Dune, but gender is not. Frank Herbert, like him or hate him, had a very binary understanding here. So we have Kynes who clearly is gendered as a male and a heterosexual male. And Denis' second reason, I think, shows a lot of problems because he says, well, women tend to be good negotiators or peacemakers. Kynes is a negotiator and peacemaker. Therefore, it makes sense, logical sense, to make him or her and into a woman. Putting aside the dubious assumptions being made about the female sex, some of which are true and some of which are not. I'm not going to go into all the research. I'll do another video essay on this. It's very presumptive to say that Kynes is, quote, a peacemaker or a negotiator. You can make that argument, of course, but just being basal, what do we definitely know about him? We definitely know he's a male. We definitely know he's a heterosexual male. We definitely know he's a father. And we definitely know he's an ecologist. Now, to go beyond that and say he's a peacemaker, a negotiator, etc., etc., I understand what he's saying. He's kind of a cultural translator for Paul, but that's very, very speculative. What do we know about Kynes? We know he's a man. We know he's an ecologist. We know he's a father. We know he's a minor character, and we know he gets killed off. That's in the novel, and that's usually followed in the movies and adaptations. There, to me, is still not enough rational justification for moving from a man to a woman. So in terms of the racial issue, there really isn't any. There's no real controversy. There is no swapping of race, because we don't have a race for Kynes. We just don't. Anybody who says otherwise, I understand this is an issue that's getting a lot of people passionate, just don't have any information here. At the very best, we're just dealing with a question mark. But in terms of gender, we do have an answer, and the answer seems very definitive. And if Frank Herbert wanted it differently, he would have given us a lot of clues or have made that change. But we don't have any evidence he was unsatisfied with Kynes being a male, or being a masculine male, or being a heterosexual male, or being a father. So we just don't have much basis from changing the man into a woman. And if the issue is we want more women in the cast, that can be done by creating female characters that are not in the book, but still respect the mythology. So while I respect Denis' decision and I accept it, I have to respectfully say, if fidelity was the issue, he is not being faithful to the book. So while we can say it may be a good change, it may be a defensible change, it is not a change warranted by the text. So in terms of race, there really is no controversy, and it's just being made up by these phony idiots who have not read the books or know the lore. But in terms of gender, I think the most impartial decision is there's really no justification. If you want it to happen, that's fine, but I do think it does a little bit of thematic damage. Not to most of the story or most of the book, but it does do a little bit of thematic damage. That's really not necessary. But we'll get more to what I think are the thematic problems by making Kynes a woman. And again, it's not major because Kynes is a minor character, but still I do think this controversy is legitimate, and people shouldn't feel that they're racist or sexist for bringing it up. But I would have to say that in terms of the race issue, we're not going to talk about that anymore because we don't have anything to work with. But the gender issue, I think, is much more complex. There are some things we can say, and I will just say, again, from my own partisan lens, again, we can only go with what we have in terms of our own viewpoint. I just don't see how any honest reader of Dune can say, I see a woman in Kynes. I just don't see enough warrant to do that. But we shall see where this goes. So this has been part one of the Kynes controversy in Worlds of Dune. Thank you for listening.